He was always busy. That is what everyone said about him. And that is what he believed about himself. His calendar was full. His phone never stopped vibrating. His mind never stopped calculating the next move. From the outside, it looked like ambition, discipline, drive. From the inside, it was something else. It was noise. He woke up already behind. He went to sleep already late. He measured his worth by how exhausted he felt at the end of the day. If he was tired, he must have been productive. If he was overwhelmed, he must have been important. That was the unspoken rule he lived by. But here is the part no one talks about. Busyness can become a disguise, a shield, a socially acceptable addiction. Because when you are constantly moving, you never have to sit still long enough to ask yourself the dangerous questions. Am I happy? Am I present? Am I becoming the man I said I wanted to be? The world applauded his speed. Promotions came. Messages of praise arrived. He listened with half attention. He nodded while thinking about the next obligation. He was physically present, but mentally elsewhere. And over time, that distance became normal. Here is the truth most people avoid. Constant busyness is often emotional avoidance. If you never slow down, you never have to confront dissatisfaction. You never have to admit that achievement and fulfillment are not the same thing. He was not chasing excellence. He was running from emptiness. And the cost of that realization was about to confront him in a way he could no longer ignore. The breaking point did not arrive with drama. There was no crisis, no public failure, no catastrophic loss. It happened in an ordinary moment, which made it even more unsettling. He was sitting at the table, laptop open, half listening to a story being told across from him. Someone he loved was speaking with excitement, describing something small but meaningful. He nodded at the right times. He said the right words. But when the story ended and he looked up, he realized he could not repeat a single detail. Not one. The room was warm. The conversation had been real. The opportunity to connect had been right in front of him. Yet he had been somewhere else entirely. His body had been there, but his mind was negotiating tomorrow. In that instant, a quiet question pierced through the noise. If I keep living like this, what else will I miss? Birthdays that blur together, conversations that never go deep, moments that never return. He had optimized his calendar, his workflow, his efficiency, but he had never optimized his attention. And attention is the currency of love. Where you place it determines what grows and what slowly withers. That realization unsettled him more than any missed deadline ever could. Because deadlines can be extended, opportunities at work can reappear, but moments do not wait. Once they pass, they do not circle back. For the first time, he felt something stronger than pressure. He felt clarity. And clarity can be uncomfortable because it forces a choice. Clarity does not whisper comfort. It demands responsibility. Once he saw the pattern, he could no longer pretend it was normal. He began to recognize how often he used work as a shield, how frequently he chose urgency over honesty. It was easier to answer emails than to ask himself why success never felt like enough. He had built a reputation on reliability, but privately he was disconnected from himself. The more he achieved, the more he needed to achieve, because accomplishment had become his identity. Without performance, who was he? Without pressure, what remained? This is the trap few people dare to name. When your value is tied to output, rest feels like weakness. Presence feels inefficient. Reflection feels indulgent. So you stay in motion. You convince yourself that slowing down is irresponsible, when in truth it is necessary. He began to understand that busyness had protected him from deeper conversations. Conversations about purpose, about fear, about the quiet insecurity that whispered he might not be enough without constant proof. Movement had numbed the discomfort. Silence would expose it. And for the first time in years, he chose to sit with that silence. No screen, no distraction, just the uncomfortable awareness of what he had been avoiding. It was not dramatic. It was honest. And honesty became the turning point. The moment of realization was quiet, almost invisible. He noticed the small things he had been missing. The laughter of a child at the edge of a room. The way sunlight fell across the table in the morning. The feeling of a deep conversation that did not have to be efficient or productive. These were not grand events. They were ordinary moments, yet they had been invisible to him for years. He recognized that success without presence is hollow. Achievement without connection is empty. Every promotion, every recognition, every completed project had come at the cost of attention he could never reclaim. He had measured life in output, but life measures itself in presence. From that day forward, the rhythm of his life changed. He did not abandon responsibility, but he reprioritized. Tasks that once consumed his identity became tools, not proofs of worth. Work became aligned with purpose, not a mask for avoidance. Every interaction, every decision, was now filtered through awareness of what truly mattered. He learned that the greatest victories are not measured on calendars or in reports. They are measured in presence, in the moments we choose to fully show up for life, for love, for ourselves. And in that choice, he found a quiet power stronger than any title or achievement, a power born from clarity, attention, and intentional living. He began to rebuild intentionally, not through grand gestures, but through small, deliberate shifts. He started with his mornings, guarding the first hour of the day as sacred time for reflection, planning, and presence. Emails waited, meetings waited, the world could wait. For once, he did not respond to urgency with urgency. He responded with purpose. He redefined his priorities, asking himself daily which relationships, actions, and commitments truly aligned with his values. He learned to say no without guilt and yes with clarity. Every choice became a deliberate act of alignment, rather than an automatic reaction to pressure. He also discovered the power of boundaries. Devices no longer dictated his attention. Notifications were limited. Work stopped at a time he chose, not when exhaustion forced him. Space for family, for quiet, for thought became non-negotiable. Through these boundaries, he reclaimed hours of attention, the currency he had spent unknowingly for years. Most importantly, he cultivated presence, listening fully, speaking intentionally, and engaging with life beyond the calendar. The small, seemingly ordinary moments now held profound meaning. Life became a series of conscious experiences rather than a blur of tasks and obligations. In reclaiming his attention, he reclaimed himself, and in reclaiming himself, he found the freedom to live fully, to love fully, and to act with the confidence that the work he chose to do mattered, because it was aligned with the life he wanted to lead. He understood that awareness alone was not enough. Insight without action leaves the mind burdened and the heart unfulfilled. Knowledge of what he had been missing demanded deliberate practice. Every day became a choice, to drift back into business or to act with intention. And each small choice accumulated into a life markedly different from the one he had known. He embraced the discipline of reflection. Each evening, he reviewed the day, not for tasks completed, but for moments fully experienced. Each act of presence reinforced a cycle of awareness, care, and meaning. In parallel, he recognized the value of teaching and mentoring others. By sharing his journey, he created a ripple effect, turning personal awareness into communal transformation. His story was no longer solely about himself. It became a lesson, a guidepost, a mirror for anyone willing to examine how they spend the most valuable resource, their attention. He asked himself difficult questions. Did I give my attention where it mattered? Did I speak and listen with care? Did I notice what is often invisible? Through this process, he learned that living intentionally is a muscle, strengthened through practice, not theory. He also cultivated gratitude for the unnoticed. Sunlight through the window, the sound of laughter, the quiet trust of loved ones. These details became anchors, connecting him to what had previously been overlooked. Through these practices, he transformed busyness into purposeful engagement. Life was no longer measured in completed tasks or accomplishments, but in the depth and quality of presence. He became a man not defined by what he did, but by how fully he lived. He realized that the world would always demand more than he could give. Urgency would never stop. Deadlines would continue. Notifications would persist. But he had learned that discipline is not punishment. Discipline is the intentional creation of space for what truly matters. It is choosing life over the appearance of life. He also discovered the power of moments. Brief, ordinary events could hold extraordinary meaning if attention was given. A conversation, a walk, a shared meal became vessels of connection, teaching him that significance is not always grandiose, but often quiet, intimate, and immediate. Through this intentional approach, he reclaimed energy, focus, and presence. Work, relationships, and self-growth became intertwined rather than competing forces. Productivity no longer defined him. Presence did. And in presence, he finally found the fulfillment that business had masked for so long. He came to understand that true transformation is not a single moment, but a series of small, deliberate choices repeated over time. Each choice to pause, to listen, to notice, to act with intention built a new rhythm. Business no longer ruled his life. It became a tool he used rather than a master he served. He began to measure success differently, not by the number of tasks completed or emails answered, but by the depth of connection, the clarity of thought, and the calmness in his presence. He saw that real achievement was not in how much he could do, but in how fully he could engage with what mattered. He also realized that sharing this wisdom amplified its power. By helping others recognize the subtle traps of busyness, he not only reinforced his own transformation, but created a ripple effect of awareness. People around him began to pause, reflect, and reclaim their attention. Moments once taken for granted became intentional. Relationships strengthened. Work became purposeful, not merely urgent. The man who was always busy had learned the hardest lesson. Life is not lived in the completion of tasks, but in the presence we bring to each fleeting moment. And once he embraced this truth, every day became an opportunity to be truly alive, fully attentive, and quietly powerful. At this point, he no longer feared silence or stillness. He had discovered that the greatest growth happens not in motion, but in presence. Every pause became a chance to evaluate, to reflect, and to choose intentionally. He no longer let the demands of the world dictate his value. Instead, he defined his worth by the attention he gave to what truly mattered. He embraced a life guided by priorities, not distractions. Tasks were completed with purpose, relationships were nurtured with care, and his inner world was tended with the same diligence he once reserved for work. He realized that attention is the most powerful form of love and action. Where it is placed, life flourishes. Where it is withheld, even the most impressive accomplishments feel empty. In the quiet moments, he felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The man who was once constantly busy had become fully alive. Every conversation, every glance, every ordinary event was now imbued with meaning. He had learned that productivity alone does not create fulfillment. Presence does. And with this understanding, he could finally live with clarity, purpose, and strength that resonates beyond himself. He recognized that this transformation was ongoing. Awareness alone was not enough to sustain the change. He committed to daily reflection, to checking in with his intentions, and to observing where busyness could creep back in. Every choice became deliberate. Every action became an opportunity to align with the life he wanted to lead. He practiced presence in the ordinary, walking down the street, listening to a friend, sharing a meal, or reading a book. Each moment became intentional. He discovered that attention amplifies experience. The more he gave, the richer life became. Productivity became a tool, not a measure of worth. The lessons he learned were subtle but profound. Success is hollow without awareness. Achievement is meaningless without alignment. Every morning became an opportunity to set intentions, to prioritize presence, and to engage fully with what mattered most. Every evening became a time to reflect, to learn, and to adjust. He embraced boundaries without guilt, protecting his attention as if it were the most valuable asset in the world because it was. He learned to say no to distractions, to obligations that did not align, and to habits that eroded focus. The difference now was not in the noise outside, but in the control he held over the noise inside. He chose which interruptions mattered, which tasks deserved attention, and which obligations could wait without guilt. This was not laziness, it was mastery. He understood that alignment required constant vigilance. The temptation to return to old patterns was real, subtle, and persistent. Every unguarded moment could slip into reactive busyness, and the world will always demand more. But it is not the world that defines the value of a life. It is the choices made in each moment of presence. He had stopped being busy, and in that pause, he found freedom, clarity, and the quiet power to live fully. He had reclaimed not just his time, but his life. He realized that the path forward required not just personal change, but a commitment to consistency. Growth is not a single decision, it is a daily practice. The man who had defined himself by constant motion now defined himself by deliberate action, mindful presence, and the quiet joy of fully living each moment. He came to understand that true fulfillment is cumulative. It is not earned in a single breakthrough or dramatic shift. It grows in the quiet consistency of deliberate choices. Every intentional action, every moment of presence, compounded over time to create a life markedly different from the one driven by busyness alone. He no longer feared missing out on what the world demanded. He focused on what his life demanded. Each interaction, each decision, each pause became measured against his values rather than external expectations. Work, relationships, and personal growth coexisted, not in conflict, but in alignment. He understood that attention is the currency of significance. Where it is invested, life flourishes. Where it is neglected, even achievement feels hollow. By choosing presence over motion, he reclaimed the moments that matter most. The man who was always busy had become fully alive, fully attentive, and fully empowered to live a life of meaningful impact. He realized that this transformation was not just personal, it was universal. Everyone faces the lure of busyness, the temptation to measure worth by output, the distraction of constant motion. What set him apart was the choice to step off the treadmill and examine what truly mattered. He learned to recognize the subtle patterns that once controlled him, the automatic response to busyness, the unconscious avoidance of discomfort, the habit of measuring worth by output. He observed them without judgment and chose differently. He replaced reaction with intention, distraction with focus, and obligation with purpose. In practicing this every day, he found that life became richer, relationships stronger, and inner peace attainable. He began to notice patterns in others, too. People around him were exhausted, distracted, and disconnected. By modeling presence and intentionality, he quietly inspired change, not through lectures, but through example, through showing that life could be lived fully, attentively, and purposefully. He understood that attention is a gift. It cannot be borrowed, postponed, or manufactured. It must be chosen, nurtured, and protected. And in choosing it deliberately, he found freedom, clarity, and strength that no busyness could ever provide. The man who had always been busy had finally discovered what life had been asking all along: to show up fully, to care deeply, and to live intentionally. He saw that life is made up of invisible threads, the small, easily overlooked moments that weave together to form meaning. Each conversation, each pause, each act of attention became a stitch in the fabric of a life lived with purpose. The way he listened, the way he prioritized, the way he engaged with life, all of it demonstrated a new standard, one that invited others to pause, reflect, and consider their own patterns. In this ripple effect, he found another layer of fulfillment. Transformation was no longer solitary. By choosing presence, he amplified meaning beyond himself. The man who had once equated value with busyness now realized that the highest impact comes not from doing more, but from being fully present. He realized that the journey was ongoing. There would always be new distractions, new demands, and new temptations to fall back into old patterns. Awareness alone was not enough. It required vigilance, reflection, and conscious choice every single day. He embraced the practice of checking in with himself, asking at regular intervals whether his actions aligned with his values and intentions. This self-audit became a ritual, not a burden. What had once gone unnoticed now carried significance. He began to approach every day with awareness. Meetings, tasks, and responsibilities were no longer the measure of value. Instead, he measured his life by the depth of engagement he brought to each interaction, the care with which he approached each moment, and the presence he offered to those around him. Through this lens, even the ordinary became extraordinary. It was a way to ensure that busyness never disguised itself as purpose again. He also understood that growth is measured not in dramatic transformations, but in consistent, deliberate alignment. Each intentional decision reinforced the habit of presence. Each pause strengthened the ability to choose consciously. Each moment attended to became a building block of a life that was meaningful, connected, and fully lived. In doing so, he created space for connection, reflection, and meaningful work. He also shared his insights with those around him. Teaching, mentoring, and guiding became extensions of his transformation. By helping others navigate the trap of constant busyness, he reinforced his own practice and created a ripple effect of presence and intentionality. Life no longer measured him by his accomplishments, but by the depth of his attention and the quality of his presence. The man who had always been busy had finally learned to live deliberately, fully, and with purpose. He discovered that the smallest changes produced the deepest transformation. A single moment of attention, a deliberate pause, a mindful choice, these created a ripple that reshaped his entire life. He realized that presence, not activity, was the foundation of fulfillment. Tasks could be done, goals achieved, yet without awareness, none of it mattered. The man who had once been consumed by busyness had now cultivated a life of depth, focus, and fulfillment that no external achievement could ever replicate. He understood that reclaiming his attention was the most powerful gift he could offer himself and the people around him. It was no longer about doing more or proving worth through constant motion. It was about showing up fully, listening deeply, and acting with intention. He learned that the richness of life is found in engagement, not completion. In being present, he discovered subtleties he had missed for years: the tone of a voice, the pause in a conversation, the energy of a room. These details, once overlooked, now became the markers of a life lived consciously. This awareness reshaped his decisions, his priorities, and his interactions. Busyness could no longer dominate him. Instead, he moved with purpose, guided by values, presence, and clarity. The man who had always been busy had learned that fulfillment is not earned through constant action, but through deliberate attention to what truly matters. He realized that life's true value is measured by the attention we invest, not the tasks we complete. Every moment spent fully present became an act of significance. The quiet awareness of what truly matters allowed him to reclaim time. He had unknowingly surrendered to endless motion. He no longer let urgency dictate his choices. He created space for reflection, connection, and intentional action. Work, relationships, and self-growth were no longer in conflict, but aligned through conscious prioritization. Every decision was filtered through the lens of purpose, transforming ordinary moments into experiences rich with meaning. He understood that fulfillment is cumulative, built moment by moment, choice by choice. By investing attention deliberately, he nurtured a life that was not merely lived, but deeply felt. The man who had always been busy had finally discovered the difference between motion and presence, and in that understanding, he found freedom, clarity, and strength to live a fully engaged life. He realized that the lessons he had learned were not reserved for extraordinary moments, but for every day. Presence, intentionality, and alignment were not goals to achieve once. They were practices to be woven into every action, every decision, every interaction. He approached each day with awareness, asking not what he could do, but how he could show up fully. Meetings, tasks, and obligations became opportunities to practice deliberate engagement. Relationships deepened, work became purposeful, and even the smallest moments carried significance. By choosing attention over motion, he discovered that life unfolds differently. The man who had once equated busyness with value now measured it by depth, presence, and impact. He understood that transformation is cumulative, subtle, and ongoing, and that the greatest power comes not from doing more, but from being fully alive in each moment. He understood that reclaiming presence is not a destination, but a continuous journey. Life will always offer distractions, pressures, and demands that tempt us back into reactive busyness. What matters is the commitment to choose intentionally, moment after moment. He practiced self-awareness daily, pausing to reflect on where his attention was going and whether it aligned with his priorities. He protected his time, set boundaries, and nurtured the relationships and activities that mattered most. Each small, deliberate action reinforced a life built on clarity and purpose. He realized that fulfillment is not found in the accumulation of tasks, but in the depth of engagement. Every choice to show up fully, every pause to notice what truly matters, strengthened the foundation of a meaningful life. The man who had once been consumed by business had learned that presence is the truest measure of success, and in embracing it, he finally lived with intentionality, focus, and quiet power. He discovered that transformation is rooted in attention. The moments we invest consciously shape the trajectory of our lives, far more than the endless tasks we complete. By transforming his own relationship with busyness, he created subtle shifts in everyone around him. Colleagues, friends, and family began to notice his presence, his calm, his focus. They were drawn not to his productivity, but to the clarity and intentionality he exuded. He understood that influence is not loud. It is quiet, consistent, and rooted in authenticity. Every action aligned with purpose became a lesson without words. Every deliberate pause, every mindful interaction, every choice to be present compounded into lasting change. He began to see that the quality of his attention determined the quality of his life. Distractions were no longer tolerated. Obligations that did not align with purpose were declined. Work became a tool to support a meaningful life, not a measure of worth. Relationships, reflection, and intentional living took precedence, creating a rhythm that was sustainable, fulfilling, and deeply human. The man who had always been busy realized that presence is the true currency of life. In reclaiming it, he reclaimed freedom, clarity, and strength. By showing up fully in each moment, he built a life defined not by motion, but by meaning, depth, and intentional impact. Instead, his attention defined who he was and how he impacted the world around him. The man who had once measured worth by activity now measured it by presence, clarity, and intentionality. He began to notice subtle shifts in the people around him. Friends, family, and colleagues responded to his presence, mirroring the awareness he cultivated. By modeling intentional living, he created a ripple effect, inspiring others to examine their own relationship with busyness. They are not measured by accolades or completed tasks, but by the depth of engagement, the presence offered, and the connections nurtured. Every moment invested consciously became a legacy. He had learned that life cannot be reclaimed through busyness, only through deliberate attention. By choosing presence over motion, he discovered clarity, freedom, and strength. Old habits of reactive busyness would test him daily. What mattered was vigilance, the ability to notice when he drifted, and the discipline to return to presence. Transformation was continuous, requiring conscious effort in every moment. He cultivated rituals that reinforced intentionality, reflection in the morning, mindful pauses throughout the day, and deliberate choices in relationships and work. By protecting his attention, he ensured that busyness could no longer overshadow meaning. Each decision became a deliberate investment in a life aligned with purpose and values. He understood that attention is the foundation of fulfillment. Every act of focus, care, and presence shaped the trajectory of his life. The moments he chose to invest consciously accumulated into lasting transformation. The man who had once been consumed by busyness now measured life not by accomplishments, but by depth, engagement, and the quality of his presence. He realized that success without attention is hollow. Achievement without presence is meaningless. By embracing intentionality, he reclaimed freedom, clarity, and power over his life. Life became an unfolding series of meaningful moments, each one reinforcing the understanding that presence, not motion, defines the richness of existence. He finally saw that living intentionally is not about eliminating activity, but about directing it. A shared meal, a quiet walk, a meaningful conversation, these became milestones of achievement. He had learned that fulfillment is not found in quantity of actions, but in the quality of attention invested. The man who had always been busy had finally aligned motion with meaning, and in that alignment, life became rich, intentional, and deeply satisfying. He discovered that true change is contagious. He understood that the choice to be present transforms ordinary moments into profound experiences. Listening became deeper, conversations more meaningful, and even mundane tasks carried significance when approached with awareness. Life was no longer a blur of motion but a series of intentional, connected moments. Every decision, from how he spent his mornings to how he responded to others, became an exercise in alignment. Busyness no longer dictated his identity. Tasks, work, and obligations became tools to support a meaningful life rather than measures of worth. Each action was chosen, not compelled. Each interaction was intentional, creating relationships, experiences, and memories that mattered. He learned that fulfillment accumulates through consistent practice, not dramatic gestures. Every mindful choice, every moment of attention, strengthened his life's foundation. The man who had always been busy had finally discovered that presence is the true measure of success, and that the life we create is defined by where we place our attention. He recognized that this journey was lifelong. There would always be new demands, distractions, and pressures. The difference was in awareness and choice. By continually choosing presence, he ensured that busyness would never again define his life. The man who had always been busy had finally learned to live fully, deeply, and intentionally, turning ordinary moments into extraordinary life. Each day became an opportunity to practice clarity, focus, and intentional living. Through this ongoing commitment, he found balance, purpose, and fulfillment. Work, relationships, and self-growth no longer competed but harmonized. Guided by conscious priorities, the man who had been always busy had transformed his life, proving that attention is the most powerful force in creating a meaningful existence. In the end, he understood that the most important achievements are invisible,